Texas to turn Texas blue. Thank you so much for joining. It is my pleasure and honor to have Representative Veronica Escobar and Representative Joaquin Castro on this Get Out the Vote event. What a wonderful way to kick off, voting on November 3rd. Thank you so much for both of you for joining, getting behind our campaign, and supporting our campaign here in North Austin suburbs that goes all the way up to Killeen. I would like to start off with just introducing the both of you to Central Texas voters up here. And hopefully you'll tell us a little bit about your races and what you're hearing on the ground. As you know, we're still in the middle of a pandemic, and we're hearing that Latino Texans and Black Texans are disproportionately being impacted by COVID and the challenges of being able to survive and make a living in this pandemic right now. Tell us a little bit about what you're hearing on the ground as we all go into November 3rd with the hopes of big change for Texas. So I'll start with Representative Castro, if you'd like to start.
Oh, sure. Well, we just had record-breaking turnout during early vote, which is amazing to see because, there's so many folks who work so hard over the years to get people to come out and vote, especially the Latino community. And it's been amazing to see so much energy and so much passion of people wanting to actually they're anxious to get out and vote. And now we have one day left, which is election day. So I hope if folks haven't voted, that they'll go out and vote. But, for the longest time, Texas ranked in the bottom 3 in terms of voter participation among all the states in the nation. And you see what can happen, the changes that we can make. And I think we're on the brink of making when people actually come out and vote. And you've run an incredible race, a strong race. And so we're right there with you, hoping and working for the best on Tuesday.
Thank you so much. Representative Escobar represents El Paso and the district over there that was formerly held by Representative Beto O'Rourke. Tell us what you're seeing this year in 2020. This is a big year for Texas.
Well, Donna, I want to first say thank you for running. Thank you for being such a great candidate. It is an enormous sacrifice to run for office and to put your life on hold and, to do the heavy lifting that it takes to legitimately run for a seat like this with all of your heart and your soul. And that's what you've done. And we are just so excited. We want to see our Texas delegation grow, our Democratic delegation, and just are so excited about your race. I want to thank my great colleague, Chairman Joaquin Castro, who's been an incredible leader for the Congressional Hispanic Caucus and just a dear friend. He and his brother and I have been doing the rounds trying to help our Texas candidates. I was telling him, I feel like I've seen him more than I see my family, and like I should change my last name to Castro, and then just plug myself as the older, wiser of the Castro triplet. So I may do that. I may change my Twitter handle to that. But anyway, so 2 things. COVID, number 1, El Paso, Texas is unfortunately the number 2 hotspot. And what we have seen across the country is that Latinos, brown and Black communities are being crushed by this virus. We had a pretty powerful Congressional Hispanic Caucus hearing. The chairman put together kind of like a congressional hearing, but for the caucus to talk about Latinos in COVID. And Dr. Peter Hotez, just a widely recognized expert on these issues, who we've all seen on cable TV, described the impact on Latino communities in the southern part of the country as a decimation of an entire generation of Latinos. Those were his words. And it was jarring and heartbreaking and tragic. And it's what's happening in El Paso. And, before we hit our peak, I was knocking on doors as safely as I could. I was masked up. I'd knock on a door and step a few feet back and, just kind of talk to people either through their door, or they'd come outside and we'd socially distance. And really the number 1 issue on people's minds leading up to, when we hit our peak was COVID, and the impact not just on their family and themselves, but people terrified that they would get sick because they don't have health care. And we live in a state that is doing everything possible to take away our health care. Also completely terrified of losing their jobs, or those folks who are at the tail end of unemployment benefits who don't know what they're going to do next. Depression, and people facing serious mental health challenges. And so it's, this is a really traumatic, terrible time. But as the chairman mentioned, people are eager to vote. We have been breaking records in El Paso as well. I am so proud of the community. And I think people understand that this is one of those elections where our lives literally depend on the outcome. And so, I know that the chairman, his brother, myself, and others, we've been working on turnout. And in districts like yours, what is so fantastic is that people are motivated and inspired by a great candidate. Not only do you have an opponent that really has voted against his constituents' best interests, but they have a candidate who will inspire them and get them fired up. So it's very, very exciting. Despite all the awfulness, I feel like there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, thank you so much. You've obviously really summed up the challenges. We have the Senate that's gone on recess now until after the election while we wait on a COVID relief package. So there are definitely huge challenges. We have the GOP running on a message that right now that they support pre-existing conditions, even though even my opponent, the 9-term congressman, voted over and over again against pre-existing conditions. They have driven people into the fear of, even if they do get COVID, will they be able to go see a doctor? Will they get the care that they need in a hospital? And this is extremely challenging time for all of us. I have to say that I am so grateful to have wonderful leaders like both yourself, Representative Castro, and also Representative Secretary Julian Castro, both the Castro brothers behind our campaign. It's a big deal for us. We are trying to make the case to underserved communities that have never been asked for their vote. They've never had someone say that I care about you and the challenges that you face. That's the message that we've been running in our district, and we hope that our turnout will stay high through November 3rd. As you all know, Williamson County has been leading Texas of all the 30 most populated counties in voter turnout, which has been amazing. And we believe that this will hopefully get us through this November 3rd and have huge impact in Texas in terms of representation. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the Latino vote, right, which is talked about so much when we talk about turning Texas blue, bringing representation. Recently, we had a year-long research study done and funded by an organization called the Texas Organizing Project Education Fund, where they talked and had long qualitative conversations with Latino voters across Texas. And what they found are two things. One is that voting is very much a habit, and it is a habit that is formed over time. And not voting is not a immigrant issue, but it is actually a family issue. It is an issue about developing good habits amongst your family, having generations of people go out to vote. The second interesting thing that they have discovered is that even though most Latinos identify with many of the Democratic Party's values, many of them do not see themselves as one party or the other. They see themselves as independents, even though when they do vote, they vote for Democratic candidates. And I would love to know how, as very successful, wonderful Latino leaders of Texas, representing Texas, doing the work in Congress, how have you reached out to your constituents? How have you talked to them? And share some of your expertise on getting out the vote in Texas, making sure that we energize every single voter and every single community to come out and make sure that they know that by voting that they have control over their future. I'll start with you, Representative Castro, since you went.
Well, you're right. I mean, I think one of the fundamental challenges for the Latino community when it comes to participating in voting has been that for a big portion of the Latino community, they've hardly been reached out to or engaged by campaigns. Because historically, what happens with most campaigns is that they're short on time and they're short on money. And when you get that combination of factors, what happens is that they tend to target people who are very consistent voters. And many Latinos in Texas either vote inconsistently or many haven't voted before. So a lot of them are not getting the door knocks. They're not getting the phone calls or the texts now that have become so popular. They're not getting the mail outs. And all of that essentially creates its own cycle where, you know, people aren't availing themselves of the political process and the campaigns aren't reaching out to them. I think what we've seen in recent years is that, especially as there are more resources coming into Texas to actually target inconsistent voters and people who've never voted before, is that the folks, the communities that haven't been engaged, including many Latino communities, are actually getting the door knocks now, and they're getting the phone calls, and they're getting people following up with them and asking them to vote. And, you know, there is this idea that, well, these people just don't care or they're too lazy to get out there and vote. And I actually think it's something completely different. And I'll tell you real quick a story that crystallizes this for me. It was around election time a few years ago, and I was going to visit my mom where we grew up on the deep west side of San Antonio. In that area of the west side, it's probably over 90% Mexican American. And I stopped at this bakery along the way by her house. And the guy behind the counter actually recognized me, although he thought I was my brother. So he actually recognized my brother. But, you know, it was good enough, right? I told him, no, I'm Joaquin, I'm the congressman, blah, blah, blah. And I asked him if he was going to vote. And he said that he wanted to vote, but that he didn't know, he saw all the signs up in the neighborhoods. He didn't know what any of the candidates stood for or, you know, who he should vote for. And so what he was saying was, I don't want to go vote because I don't know who the good guys are, so to speak, or the good women and who the bad ones are. In other words, I don't have enough information to make an informed decision about who to go vote for. And also, if I don't have enough information, I don't want to go do the wrong thing and hurt everybody by making the wrong choice. So it's almost kind of akin to the doctor's ethic of first do no harm, right? If you don't know enough, if you don't have enough information, don't just go pick among 3 people or 4 people. So people tend to just stay back, you know, at that point and not vote. So that is finally changing. People are finally getting the engagement and the information they need to feel comfortable availing themselves of the political process and going to vote.
That's an amazing story. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm so sorry. I want to just piggyback off of that. That is everything that the chairman just mentioned is 100% correct. You layer on top of that many Latinos live in news deserts. As we see the shrinking of newspapers, or you see kind of these monopolies taking over news stations, what is suffering is a lot of local coverage. And so, you know, so many of these critical races, school board, city council, commissioner's court, state rep, they're not getting the coverage that they need. And to the chairman's point of this idea of first do no harm, you know, well, yeah, you can go on someone's website, but they're going to tell you what they, you know, whatever they want to tell you. You know, your opponent can say he's for pre-existing condition. That's a lie. Or for, you know, for protecting people's access to care, even if you have pre-existing conditions. We know that's a lie. Donald Trump says the same thing. John Cornyn says the same thing. It's a lie, you know. And so you need you need active, engaged journalists helping to expose the truth for people. And a lot of Latinos live in news deserts. You look at the Rio Grande Valley, you look at, you know, many rural pockets in all over the state, all over the country. So, you know, the candidates are not getting to our folks. They're not getting the news and information they need. And to the point that you made, Donna, about, you know, people who just haven't been asked, that is absolutely the case with Latinos. You know, I always kind of bristle when people are like, well, when is the sleeping giant finally going to wake up? Like, well, you know, why don't you join us in outreach and talking to people, you know, in ways that are worthy of their vote. For the last few years, actually for the last 3 races, this was even before I was in Congress, I was focusing work here on the ground in El Paso, where we've had traditionally very low voter turnout. I've been focused on what we call the low propensity voters. And so I started this in 2016 as a way to help the Hillary Clinton campaign, and then continued it in 2018 when I was running for Congress in the general election after I'd won my primary, to help myself, but also to help my friend Beto O'Rourke, who was running for Senate. And I'm doing it again, this time to help Joe Biden and MJ, and other Democrats. And here's the strategy that I have employed in these 3 races, and it works. I've sat with the local Democratic Party and I've said, you guys take the 100% voters. Make sure you're calling the people who Joaquin described, the known quantities, right? The folks we know are going to go vote. They're the low-hanging fruit. They're the ones that everybody chases after. But make sure they understand how to stay safe during voting. Make sure they know, while early voting was going on, where they can go, what they need to bring. Just make sure they have the information they need. And let me take the rest of the folks, the low propensity voters and the new voters. And so this year I partnered with my very good friend, State Representative Cesar Blanco, and the local Democratic Party. And Rep. Blanco and I basically funded an effort that has been going on for months now to call, and I was also knocking on doors until it became too dangerous because of our #2 status in the country, but to talk to these voters. And these are tough conversations, like, oh, you only want to talk to me when it's election time, or the Democrats have never cared about me. You're the first person who's called me in years. Even the Republicans don't care about me. They've never called me or haven't called me in years. Because a lot of our low propensity voters, we don't have partisan scores for, because they haven't voted in such a long time. And so, you're calling people, you don't know if they're a Dem, an independent, a Republican. You're just calling person to person, having these great conversations. I had a conversation with a young woman in her mid-20s just a couple days ago. Amazing conversation with this young Latina who, when I asked her, are you planning on voting this year? And she said, no, I don't think so. And I tried to convince her, I asked her, do you think things are going okay? I mean, are you happy with the direction the country's moving in? And we talked about her discomfort with everything happening around her and her dismay with the Trump administration. And so I told her, well, you're exactly what we need. You're exactly the type of person we need heading to the polls. And I described, because she told me she had never voted before. She had registered at 18 and had never voted. So I literally walked her through the whole thing. I said, okay, it's going to be like an ATM machine with a touch screen. And, I was like, stop me if this is, if you already know all this, but went through all of it. And at the end of the call, she said, you know what? I want to thank you, and I'm going to go vote. I didn't know how to vote, and I was too embarrassed to ask. So thank you for walking me through it. That's the power of these conversations. And that's why what you're doing, Donna, and what the chairman is doing, what I'm doing, and so many folks across Texas, reaching out to those people who don't get contacted, it is so critical and important. And that's what wins elections.
Oh, wow. I mean, amazing stories, both of you bringing, really a lot of focus into issues that we have to address. We know that the Latino community is not a monolith. We know that over 40,000 Latinos have no voting history, like this young lady that you spoke about. So it is important that we address their issues. A lot of times candidates tend to focus only on immigration, but guess what? Latinos need healthcare coverage. They need to be able to send their kids to school and be able to afford a good education. They need to be able, they want high wage jobs so they can put that down payment on a home and raise a family. And young people want to be able to move out of their parents' families and start their own families. So this is how we've engaged our district, and we've found this to be extremely a good way of getting people out and reminding them how to vote, come out and vote, and that we care about these bread and butter issues about being able to put groceries on the table and take care of kids. One of the interesting things I want to bring to your attention in Texas is that over the last 8 years, hundreds of polling locations in Texas have been closed down. And this came to my attention because, as you know, Williamson County is leading in voter turnout. But in Bell County, what we found is that even though we're exceeding the levels of 2016 turnout, like we are right now at almost 90% of the turnout that we had in 2016, we see much lower capacity in voting. And our campaign really looked into this. And what we found is this. We found that in Williamson County, there was one polling location for every around 20,000 registered voters. Yet in Bell County, there was one polling location for every 34,000 registered voters. In fact, in the city of Temple, Texas, which has a majority Latino and Black American population, there's only one polling location. And on the day that early voting started, on the 13th of October, there were 5-hour-long waits. And there were waits because there was only 10 machines. And in many cases, throughout that day, only one machine was working. And there was no backup plan to replace those other 9 machines that were not working with working machines. And imagine if you're an essential worker, or you work in the healthcare industry. You might get 30 minutes if you're lucky for lunch. You don't have the luxury of driving 20 minutes to the other side of town to your polling location, standing in line for 5 hours, and then coming back. And this is such an important thing that regardless of which state you live in, whether it's Texas, which is considered, a red state, that it is unacceptable for people to be standing in line for 5 hours, 3 hours, 2 hours to vote. They should be able to vote in a reasonable amount of time. And I would love to hear any thoughts that you have to add to this challenge that we are seeing in parts and pockets of Texas.
Can I jump in first, Chairman? So Donna, I served in local government before I was in Congress. I was the county judge of El Paso County. And in Texas, there are a couple different ways that elections offices can be run. In many counties, like in El Paso, you have an elections administrator, and the governing body above the elections administrator is the county judge, the district clerk, the county clerk, the tax assessor collector, the chair of the Republican Party, and the chair of the Democratic Party. And they are the governing body that oversees the elections administrator. But ultimately, the commissioner's court funds that office. Oops, sorry, this is what happens when all my things are connected. And so the commissioner's court funds the number of machines, funds the number of elections workers, et cetera. This is why one of the things I mentioned, everything on your ballot, every election matters. And when you're in a news desert, the vast majority of people don't understand that. They don't, because they don't have that information. But all those positions on that governing body are elected. The tax assessor collector, the county clerk, the county judge, your county commissioners. And so, voter suppression starts there at the local level, whether or not you're going to have people that believe in adequately funding and offering robust options for voters. That's the first line of defense, all the way up to the governor, and all the AG, who they can create a voter suppression plan, and at every opportunity try to suppress the vote. And so that's why each one of these elections matters. And it is, as the chairman described, the self-fulfilling prophecy of not reaching out to voters, the self-fulfilling prophecy of keeping them in office by them keeping voters at home. So that it makes victories that much sweeter when we're able to overcome so much opposition, but it does make those victories harder.
So I know we're getting, to the end of this conversation. So I'm going to pose a different question to Representative Castro. Many of the, participants in this research study mentioned that at some point, in their lives or on a regular casual basis, they often experience discrimination of all kinds, whether that's job discrimination, whether that's having the ability to vote, whether that's being able to go get a loan for the home that they want to buy. I would love to hear your thoughts, as the leader of the Hispanic caucus in Congress. What can Congress do? And, if we're successful enough to win, and I'm lucky enough to serve with, the both of you wonderful leaders, what can we do in Congress to ensure that we address these challenges, that we make voters of all types, all backgrounds, feel comfortable to come out and make their voices be heard?
Well, that's a great question. And we have to take it head on and make sure that we root out racism and discrimination in many fields in American society, whether it's housing, education, healthcare, whatever it may be. One of the blessings of this country is that over the generations, we have created an infrastructure of opportunity to allow people to pursue their American dreams. And if you think about it, the history of the country is also battles, civil rights battles for women, on behalf of minorities, LGBTQ plus individuals, civil rights battles to make sure that everybody in American society has the same access to that infrastructure of opportunity. And that work continues because we're not completely there. And so I'm hoping that Joe Biden will be president, that we'll have a Democratic Senate, that you'll be in the House of Representatives, and we'll send many more Texans also to the House of Representatives, and that we can take on some of this work in January.
Well, thank you so much for joining this call, helping us get out the vote here in North Austin and beyond, all the way to Killeen, Temple, Harker Heights. We are so excited, to have ran this campaign. A few last words from the both of you, encouraging words, so that we get every single vote out on November 3rd for Tuesday.
Well, I've been telling folks on my team and everyone that yes, while we are in the home stretch and you can kind of see the finish line, we have got to keep working, again, like our lives depend on it, until the polls close. So that means making sure that as we prepare for Tuesday, that we know exactly which voters have not voted yet, that we have a plan to get them out to vote, that we have every volunteer on hand making calls, doing everything possible, that we are working tirelessly. We want to wake up on Wednesday, November 4th, without a voice, because we've talked to everybody possible. So hoarse, exhausted, blissful because of the work we've done, and totally hungover because we've been celebrating all night a great victory.
Well, Veronica, you're making me feel guilty. If I still have a voice on Wednesday morning, I'm going to pretend that I'm hoarse.
I'm going to call you and I'm going to be like, do you have a voice?
And if I do, I won't answer the phone. I just want to say, everybody, we are this close to changing the course of American politics and Texas politics, and making it better for this generation and for future generations of Americans. And all we have to do in the next few days is reach out to all of our family and our friends, the people we know, and get them out to vote. And as Veronica said, leave no stone unturned. Do everything we can. And I believe, as she said, that hopefully by Tuesday, the end of Tuesday night, we'll have a new president, a new congresswoman from Central Texas that's going to DC, and a new future for the American people.
Wow. Well, thank you so much to the both of you. I'm so honored, and I'm really, truly grateful for you joining our campaign, getting behind us, realizing how important it is, and that the path to turning Texas blue runs right through our district right here in Williamson and Bell counties. Thank you so much for joining us again. And I look forward to talking to you after November 3rd, and hopefully joining the both of you in the pursuit of getting true representation for Texans, getting healthcare coverage, getting debt-free education, and getting a high-wage job to this area and across the United States. And for those of you out there who've been watching today, be safe, take all the precautions, come out and vote on November 3rd. because look at the amazing work that we have planned, that we want to do for this district. We want to make sure every single person here has the opportunities that they want to have to be their very best and to have the most wonderful life of life, liberty, and pursue the happiness that all Texans want. Thank you again so much for supporting